The year is 1642. England is a nation teetering on the brink of civil war, a tumultuous backdrop against which one of history's most profound intellects would emerge. In the small Lincolnshire hamlet of Woolsthorpe, a premature and frail infant drew his first breath, a child so tiny his survival was doubted. This was Isaac Newton, born on Christmas Day, an event that, in retrospect, seems almost prophetic for a man who would bring light to the darkest corners of natural philosophy. His arrival was not heralded by fanfare, but by the quiet anxiety of a family already touched by loss. His father, also named Isaac Newton, a prosperous yeoman farmer, had died 3 months prior, leaving his young wife Hannah Ayscough a widow at a tender age. This early paternal absence would cast a long shadow over Newton's life, shaping his personality, his relentless pursuit of knowledge, and perhaps even his profound sense of isolation. The 17th century was a crucible of change. The scientific revolution, though nascent, was gathering momentum. Figures like Galileo Galilei and Johannes Kepler had already challenged ancient dogmas, laying the groundwork for a new understanding of the cosmos. Yet, much remained shrouded in mystery. The forces governing the heavens and the earth were poorly understood, often attributed to divine intervention or mystical influences. It was into this intellectual void that Newton would step, armed with an unparalleled mind and an insatiable curiosity, destined to unravel the fundamental laws that govern the universe. His journey from a sickly, fatherless child in a rural village to the towering figure who would redefine physics, mathematics, and astronomy is a testament to the power of human intellect and perseverance. This narrative will explore the intricate tapestry of his life, from his formative years and struggles to his groundbreaking discoveries, personal eccentricities, and enduring legacy. Isaac Newton's birth was fraught with peril. He was so small that his mother later recounted he could have fit into a quart pot. His survival was a miracle, and perhaps a premonition of the extraordinary resilience that would characterize his life. Hannah Ayscough, left to manage the family estate, soon remarried in 1646 to Barnabas Smith, a wealthy rector from North Witham. This event, intended to provide stability, instead introduced a profound trauma into young Isaac's life. His stepfather, unwilling to raise his stepson, insisted that Isaac remain at Woolsthorpe with his maternal grandmother, Marjorie Ayscough. This separation, at the tender age of 3, was a pivotal moment. Newton harbored a deep resentment towards his mother and stepfather for this perceived abandonment. Later in life, in a list of his sins, he confessed to threatening my father and mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. This chilling entry reveals the depth of his emotional scars and the intensity of his suppressed anger. The experience fostered in him an acute sense of insecurity, a need for control, and a profound distrust of others, traits that would manifest throughout his life. He grew up largely solitary, finding solace not in companionship, but in observation and invention. At the age of 12, Newton was sent to the King's School in Grantham, a market town about 7 miles from Woolsthorpe. Here, he boarded with the apothecary, Mr. Clark, and later with Mr. Stokes, the school's headmaster. Initially, Newton was not a remarkable student. Accounts suggest he was rather inattentive and struggled academically, particularly in the early years. However, a turning point came after a bullying incident where a fellow student kicked him. This humiliation ignited a competitive spark within Newton. He resolved to surpass his tormentor not just physically, but intellectually. From that moment, his academic performance soared. It was in Grantham that Newton's mechanical aptitude and inventive genius first became apparent. He spent countless hours constructing intricate models and devices. He built a working wooden clock powered by water, a miniature windmill that ground flour, and even a carriage that he could propel himself. He also designed kites, often attaching lanterns to them to frighten the local villagers at night. His room was reportedly filled with tools, drawings, and scientific instruments. He meticulously observed the natural world around him, sketching birds, animals, and plants. He even created sundials, demonstrating an early fascination with time and celestial mechanics. These early inventions were not mere childish pastimes. They were the nascent expressions of a mind driven by a profound desire to understand how things worked, to dissect and reconstruct the mechanisms of the world. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind already grappling with complex problems. He filled them with mathematical calculations, observations of light, and designs for various contraptions. He was particularly fascinated by optics, experimenting with lenses and mirrors. This early exposure to practical mechanics and observation laid a crucial foundation for his later scientific endeavors. In 1659, at the insistence of his mother, who was now a widow again after Barnabas Smith's death, Newton returned to Woolsthorpe to manage the family estate. Hannah envisioned her son following in his father's footsteps, becoming a farmer. However, it quickly became evident that Newton had no aptitude or interest in agricultural pursuits. He was notoriously inept at farming tasks, often neglecting his duties in favor of reading, experimenting, or contemplating mathematical problems. He would send the farmhands to market, while he immersed himself in books, or construct water wheels in the streams instead of tending to crops. His uncle, William Ayscough, a Cambridge graduate, and the headmaster of Grantham School, Henry Stokes, recognized Newton's extraordinary intellectual potential. They intervened, convincing Hannah that her son's talents lay elsewhere and that he deserved a university education. This intervention proved to be a pivotal moment, redirecting Newton from a life of rural obscurity to one of unparalleled intellectual discovery. In June 1661, at the age of 18, Isaac Newton matriculated as a sizar at Trinity College, Cambridge. The status of sizar was typically granted to poor students who, in exchange for reduced fees, performed various duties for wealthier students and fellows. This arrangement likely reinforced Newton's already introverted and somewhat isolated nature. Cambridge at the time was still heavily influenced by Aristotelian philosophy, emphasizing logic, rhetoric, and classical languages. However, the winds of change were blowing, and the new mechanical philosophy, championed by figures like René Descartes and Robert Boyle, was beginning to infiltrate the academic discourse. Newton's early years at Cambridge were not marked by immediate brilliance. He was a diligent student, but initially, he absorbed the standard curriculum. However, his personal notebooks, known as his waste book, reveal a mind rapidly moving beyond the prescribed studies. He delved into the works of Descartes, whose geometry introduced him to analytical geometry, and Kepler, whose laws of planetary motion captivated him. He also read Galileo's dialogues concerning two new sciences and the works of Robert Boyle on chemistry and pneumatics. These texts, far more than the traditional curriculum, ignited his intellectual fire. He taught himself advanced mathematics, including the work of François Veit and John Wallis, quickly mastering and then extending their concepts. He began to question established theories, meticulously recording his thoughts and experiments. It was during this period that he developed an early interest in the nature of light and color, performing experiments with prisms, a precursor to his later groundbreaking work in optics. He also began to develop his own unique mathematical methods, which would eventually coalesce into calculus. His waste book is a testament to his self-directed learning and the extraordinary breadth of his intellectual curiosity. The year 1665 brought a devastating crisis to England, the Great Plague. As the epidemic spread, Cambridge University was forced to close its doors, sending its students and faculty home to avoid contagion. Newton, then a young scholar of 22, returned to the quiet solitude of Woolsthorpe Manor. This period, lasting approximately 2 years, from 1665 to 1667, is famously known as his Annus Mirabilis, his Year of Wonders. Far from being a period of intellectual stagnation, it was a time of unparalleled creativity and discovery, a period of intense, solitary thought that would lay the foundation for his most significant scientific breakthroughs. Freed from the distractions and formal constraints of university life, Newton's mind soared. It was during these 2 years that he made fundamental advancements in 3 distinct fields: calculus, flux science. Building on his earlier work and the foundations laid by others, Newton developed his method of flux science, a powerful new mathematical tool for dealing with rates of change and areas under curves. This was his independent invention of what we now call differential and integral calculus. He understood the inverse relationship between differentiation and integration, a concept fundamental to modern calculus. While Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz independently developed calculus around the same time, Newton's work at Woolsthorpe was a crucial step in its formulation. Optics and the nature of light, Newton continued his experiments with light and prisms. He famously demonstrated that white light is not pure but is composed of a spectrum of colors, each refracted at a slightly different angle. He used a second prism to recombine the dispersed colors back into white light, proving his hypothesis. This contradicted the prevailing Aristotelian view that colors were modifications of pure white light. His experiments led him to conclude that chromatic aberration, the blurring of colors, was an inherent problem with refracting telescopes, prompting him to design and construct the first successful reflecting telescope in 1668, which used mirrors instead of lenses. Universal gravitation. Perhaps the most iconic story associated with Newton, though likely apocryphal in its dramatic simplicity, is that of the falling apple. While the apple may or may not have literally hit him on the head, the anecdote symbolizes a profound intellectual leap. Observing an apple fall from a tree, Newton pondered whether the same force that pulled the apple to the earth might also be responsible for holding the moon in its orbit around the earth, and the planets in their orbits around the sun. He began to theorize about a universal force of attraction that diminished with the square of the distance. He made initial calculations, comparing the acceleration of the moon towards the earth with the acceleration of a falling object on earth. Although his initial calculations were hampered by an inaccurate estimate of the Earth's radius, the fundamental insight was revolutionary. This was the genesis of his law of universal gravitation. The annus mirabilis at Woolsthorpe was a period of intense, almost feverish intellectual activity. Newton worked largely in isolation, driven by an internal compulsion to understand the fundamental workings of the universe. These 2 years were arguably the most productive of his entire life, laying the groundwork for the scientific masterpieces that would follow decades later. Upon his return to Cambridge in 1667, he brought with him the seeds of a scientific revolution. Upon his return to Cambridge in 1667, Newton was elected a Fellow of Trinity College. His intellectual prowess was quickly recognized. In 1669, at the remarkably young age of 26, he was appointed the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, a prestigious chair previously held by Isaac Barrow, who had recognized Newton's exceptional talent and resigned in his favor. This position provided Newton with financial security and the freedom to pursue his research without distraction. As Lucasian Professor, Newton was required to deliver a series of lectures each year. His initial lectures focused on optics, presenting the findings from his annus mirabilis at Woolsthorpe. He meticulously detailed his experiments with prisms, demonstrating the composite nature of white light and explaining the phenomenon of color. These lectures formed the basis of his later monumental work, Optics. In 1668, Newton constructed his first reflecting telescope, a significant improvement over the prevalent refracting telescopes that suffered from chromatic aberration. His design used a spherical mirror to gather and focus light, eliminating the color distortions inherent in lenses. This invention brought him to the attention of the wider scientific community. In 1671, he presented a second, improved reflecting telescope to the Royal Society of London, the leading scientific institution of the time. The instrument was met with great admiration. On January 11, 1672, Newton was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society. This marked his formal entry into the public scientific arena, a step that would bring both recognition and considerable conflict. Newton's election to the Royal Society was swiftly followed by the publication of his first paper, New Theory about Light and Colors, in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society in February 1672. This paper detailed his experiments with prisms and his theory that white light was a mixture of colors. The paper was revolutionary, but it immediately drew criticism, most notably from Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke, a prominent and highly versatile scientist, architect, and curator of experiments for the Royal Society, had his own theories about light, which he believed to be based on waves or vibrations. Hooke claimed that Newton's theory was not entirely original, and that he himself had made similar observations. More importantly, Hooke challenged Newton's methodology and conclusions, particularly Newton's assertion that light was composed of particles, corpuscles. Newton, intensely sensitive to criticism and prone to intellectual possessiveness, reacted with fury. He viewed Hooke's comments as an attack on his originality and integrity. The ensuing dispute was bitter and protracted, conducted through letters exchanged via the Royal Society. Newton, known for his reclusive nature and aversion to public debate, found the controversy deeply distressing. He threatened to withdraw from scientific discourse altogether, declaring, "I see I have made myself a slave to philosophy." The conflict with Hooke, which simmered for decades, profoundly influenced Newton's later decisions, including his reluctance to publish Principia until after Hooke's death. This early conflict established a pattern. Newton was brilliant but also thin-skinned and fiercely defensive of his intellectual territory. Despite the controversies, Newton continued his extensive research. He delved deeper into alchemy, a pursuit that occupied a significant portion of his time and intellectual energy for decades. While often seen as a mystical or pseudoscientific endeavor today, alchemy in Newton's time was a legitimate field of inquiry, intertwined with chemistry and the study of matter. Newton meticulously transcribed alchemical texts, conducted countless experiments in his laboratory, and sought to uncover the hidden principles of nature through alchemical transformations. His alchemical writings are voluminous, far exceeding his work in physics and mathematics, revealing a side of Newton that was deeply immersed in esoteric knowledge and the search for fundamental truths beyond the purely mechanical. He also devoted considerable time to theological studies, particularly biblical chronology and prophecy. Newton was a devout, though unconventional, Christian. He rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, a highly controversial stance that he kept largely private due to the severe penalties for heresy at the time. His theological writings demonstrate his belief that the universe was the creation of a rational God and that understanding its laws was a way of understanding God's mind. Throughout this period, Newton remained largely solitary. He never married and had few close friends. His intense focus on his work left little room for social engagements. He was known for his absent-mindedness, often forgetting to eat or sleep when engrossed in a problem. His personality was complex, brilliant, driven, but also secretive, suspicious, and prone to fits of anger. The conflicts over his optical theories only reinforced his reclusiveness, leading him to hoard his discoveries and delay publication. The year 1684 marked a pivotal turning point in Newton's life and in the history of science. For years, the problem of planetary motion had vexed Europe's leading natural philosophers. Johannes Kepler had accurately described how planets moved, in elliptical orbits, but not why. The concept of an attractive force between celestial bodies was gaining traction, but its precise mathematical formulation remained elusive. Robert Hooke, Christopher Wren, and Edmund Halley, all prominent members of the Royal Society, had independently speculated about an inverse square law of gravity, meaning the force of attraction decreased with the square of the distance between two objects. However, none of them could mathematically derive Kepler's elliptical orbits from such a law. In August 1684, Edmund Halley, a brilliant astronomer and close friend of Hooke and Wren, traveled to Cambridge specifically to consult Newton. Halley posed a direct question. What would be the curve that a planet would describe if it were attracted towards the Sun by a force inversely proportional to the square of its distance from it? Without hesitation, Newton replied, "An ellipse." Halley, astonished, asked how he knew. Newton calmly stated that he had calculated it years ago. This revelation stunned Halley. Newton had, in fact, solved the problem during his Annus Mirabilis at Woolsthorpe, but had, characteristically, put the papers aside and forgotten about them. Halley, recognizing the immense significance of this discovery, urged Newton to publish his findings. He understood that Newton's solution was the missing piece in the puzzle of the cosmos. Halley's visit ignited a period of intense, almost superhuman intellectual effort for Newton. He threw himself into the task with an unparalleled fervor. For the next 2.5 years, he worked relentlessly, often for 18 hours a day, neglecting food and sleep. He revised his earlier calculations, expanded his theories, and meticulously organized his thoughts into a coherent, comprehensive treatise. The sheer volume and complexity of the work were staggering. The resulting masterpiece was titled Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, commonly known as Principia. It was divided into 3 books. Book I, De Motu Corporum, on the motion of bodies. This book laid out Newton's laws of motion, including the law of inertia, the relationship between force, mass, and acceleration, F equals ma, and the law of action and reaction. It also developed the mathematical tools, geometric methods, as he avoided flux science in the published work to make it more accessible, necessary to analyze motion under various forces. He demonstrated how Kepler's laws of planetary motion could be derived from an inverse square law of gravitation. Book 2, De Motu Corporum, Continuation, on the motion of bodies, continued. This section dealt with the motion of bodies in resisting mediums, such as air or water, the motion of pendulums, and the propagation of sound. It also contained a powerful refutation of Descartes' vortex theory of planetary motion, showing it to be inconsistent with observed phenomena. Book 3, De Mundi Systemate, on the system of the world. This was the culmination of the work, applying the principles developed in the first 2 books to the real world. Here, Newton presented his law of universal gravitation, stating that every particle of matter in the universe attracts every other particle with a force directly proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between their centers. He used this law to explain a vast array of phenomena: the orbits of planets, the motion of comets, the tides, the precession of the equinoxes, and the slight flattening of the Earth at its poles. Halley's role in the publication of Principia cannot be overstated. Not only did he inspire Newton to write it, but he also provided crucial financial and editorial support. The Royal Society, facing financial difficulties, was unable to fund the publication. Halley, recognizing the work's immense importance, personally bore the entire cost of printing. He also meticulously proofread the manuscript, managed the printing process, and encouraged Newton through moments of doubt and reclusiveness. Without Halley's dedication and persistence, Principia might never have seen the light of day. Principia Mathematica was finally published in July 1687. Its impact was immediate and profound. It was not merely a scientific treatise, it was a paradigm shift, a foundational text that established the framework for classical mechanics and astronomy for the next 2 centuries. Newton's work provided a unified, mathematical explanation for both terrestrial and celestial phenomena, demonstrating that the same laws governed the fall of an apple and the orbit of a planet. The Principia established the scientific method as we know it, emphasizing observation, mathematical formulation, and rigorous proof. It presented a mechanistic universe, governed by precise, predictable laws, a concept that would profoundly influence philosophy, theology, and the very way humans viewed their place in the cosmos. It was, in essence, the culmination of the scientific revolution and the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment. Newton had, through sheer intellectual power, unveiled the clockwork of the universe. The publication of Principia brought Newton immense fame and recognition, transforming him from a reclusive scholar into a public figure. While he initially resisted the limelight, his newfound prominence led him to become more involved in public affairs. In 1689, he was elected as one of Cambridge University's representatives to the Convention Parliament, which oversaw the Glorious Revolution and the ascension of William and Mary to the throne. Though he made little impact as a politician, this marked his first significant foray into public service beyond academia. In 1696, largely through the influence of his friend Charles Montague, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Newton was appointed Warden of the Royal Mint. This was a significant departure from his academic life, but one he embraced with characteristic diligence and intensity. The English coinage was in a state of crisis, plagued by widespread counterfeiting and clipping, shaving off precious metal from coins. Newton took his duties at the mint with extraordinary seriousness. He implemented rigorous reforms, modernized the coining process, and personally pursued counterfeiters with relentless zeal. He disguised himself, infiltrated taverns, and gathered evidence, often interrogating suspects himself. His efforts led to numerous arrests, convictions, and executions of counterfeiters. He proved to be an exceptionally effective and incorruptible public servant. In 1699, he was promoted to Master of the Mint, a position he held until his death. His work at the Mint was crucial in stabilizing the English economy and securing the integrity of its currency. In 1703, upon the death of his old adversary Robert Hooke, Newton was elected President of the Royal Society. He held this position for the remainder of his life, consolidating his power and influence within the English scientific establishment. As president, he presided over meetings, managed the Society's affairs, and promoted scientific research. His leadership, while autocratic at times, brought stability and prestige to the Royal Society. However, his presidency was also marked by renewed conflicts. The most notable was his bitter dispute with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz over the invention of calculus. The calculus priority dispute became a nationalistic battle, with English scientists largely supporting Newton and continental Europeans backing Leibniz. Newton, using his position as president, orchestrated an official inquiry by the Royal Society that, predictably, sided with him, though the evidence suggests independent invention by both men. This ugly dispute overshadowed much of Newton's later life, revealing his deep-seated insecurity and vindictiveness when challenged. Despite his administrative duties, Newton continued his scientific work. In 1704, he finally published Optics, or a treatise of the reflections, refractions, inflections, and colors of light. This work, largely based on his lectures from the 1670s, detailed his experiments and theories on light and color. It was written in English, unlike Principia, making it more accessible to a wider audience. Optics presented his corpuscular theory of light, that light consists of tiny particles, though he also explored wave-like properties. It included his famous experiments with prisms, the invention of the reflecting telescope, and his investigations into phenomena like diffraction and interference. Optics also contained a series of queries, at the end, when Newton speculated on a wide range of topics, including the nature of gravity, the existence of an ether, and the properties of matter. These queries often hinted at his alchemical and theological interests, demonstrating the breadth of his intellectual curiosity beyond the confines of classical physics. In 1705, Queen knighted Isaac Newton during a visit to Trinity College, Cambridge. This was the first time a scientist had been knighted for his scientific achievements, a testament to his immense stature and the growing recognition of science as a legitimate and important endeavor. From this point, he was known as Sir Isaac Newton. In his final years, Newton continued to revise Principia and Optics, publishing new editions. He also dedicated considerable time to his theological studies, particularly his attempts to establish a precise chronology of ancient history based on biblical accounts. He remained intellectually active, though his health began to decline. Sir Isaac Newton died in his sleep on March 20, 1727, at the age of 84. He was given a lavish public funeral and buried in Westminster Abbey, a rare honor for someone not of noble birth. His pallbearers included prominent noblemen, reflecting the profound respect and admiration he commanded. Newton's genius was undeniable, but his personality was as complex and multifaceted as his theories. He was a man of profound contradictions, brilliant yet reclusive, devout yet unorthodox, meticulous yet prone to fits of rage. Reclusiveness and solitude. From his early childhood, Newton cultivated a deep sense of privacy and solitude. He preferred to work alone, often foregoing food and sleep when engrossed in a problem. This reclusiveness was partly a result of his emotional scars from childhood abandonment and his intense focus on his intellectual pursuits. He had few close friends and never married, dedicating his life almost entirely to study and research. Sensitivity to criticism. Newton was notoriously thin-skinned and reacted with extreme hostility to any perceived challenge to his originality or authority. The controversies with Hooke and Leibniz consumed him, revealing a vindictive streak and a fierce possessiveness over his intellectual property. He would often delay publication of his work for years, sometimes decades, to avoid criticism or to wait for rivals to die. Absent-mindedness. When deeply immersed in thought, Newton was famously absent-minded. Stories abound of him forgetting to eat meals, dressing improperly, or walking around in a daze. He once reportedly tried to boil his watch instead of an egg. This absent-mindedness was a symptom of his extraordinary powers of concentration, where the external world faded away in the face of an internal intellectual problem. Secrecy and obsession. Newton was highly secretive about his work, particularly his alchemical and theological studies. He kept vast quantities of notes and experiments hidden, fearing ridicule or accusations of heresy. His alchemical pursuits, in particular, bordered on obsession, as he sought to uncover the fundamental secrets of matter and creation. Devotion and unorthodoxy. Newton was a deeply religious man, believing in a rational God who created a universe governed by laws. He spent more time studying theology and biblical prophecy than he did physics. However, his theological views were unorthodox. He secretly rejected the Trinity, a belief that could have led to severe persecution had it become public. His faith was intertwined with his scientific inquiry, seeing the unraveling of natural laws as a way of understanding God's design. Work ethic. Perhaps his most defining characteristic was his relentless work ethic. He possessed an almost superhuman capacity for sustained intellectual effort. His breakthroughs were not merely flashes of insight but the result of years of meticulous observation, experimentation, and rigorous mathematical analysis. He famously attributed his success not to genius, but to patient thought. Humility. At times, despite his intellectual arrogance and disputes, Newton also expressed a profound sense of humility regarding the vastness of knowledge. His famous quote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, and diverting myself in now and then finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me," reveals a deeper understanding of the limits of human knowledge, even for a mind as expansive as his own. Sir Isaac Newton's contributions to science are so monumental that they fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the universe and laid the groundwork for modern physics and engineering. 1. Laws of motion. Newton's 3 laws of motion, first articulated in Principia Mathematica, form the bedrock of classical mechanics. First law, inertia. An object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. This concept, building on Galileo's work, challenged the Aristotelian notion that objects naturally tend to come to rest. Second law, force and acceleration. The acceleration of an object is directly proportional to the net force acting on it, and inversely proportional to its mass, F equals ma. This quantitative relationship provided a precise way to calculate the effect of forces on motion. Third law, action-reaction. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This law explains how forces always occur in pairs, such as a rocket expelling gas backward to move forward. These laws provided a comprehensive framework for describing and predicting the motion of objects, from falling apples to orbiting planets. 2. Universal gravitation. Newton's law of universal gravitation was perhaps his most revolutionary contribution. It states that every particle of matter in the universe attracts every other particle with a force that is directly proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between their centers. Unification. This law unified terrestrial gravity, the force that makes objects fall to Earth, with celestial gravity, the force that keeps planets in orbit. It demonstrated that the same fundamental force governed both the heavens and the earth, shattering the ancient Greek distinction between earthly and celestial physics. Explanations. It provided a mathematical explanation for Kepler's laws of planetary motion, the tides, the precession of the equinoxes, and the trajectories of comets. It allowed for precise calculations of planetary orbits and laid the foundation for celestial mechanics. 3. Calculus, flux science. Newton independently developed a new branch of mathematics, which he called flux science, now known as calculus. This powerful tool deals with rates of change and accumulation. Differential calculus allowed for the calculation of instantaneous rates of change, derivatives, and the slopes of curves. Integral calculus allowed for the calculation of areas under curves and volumes of solids, integrals. Fundamental theorem of calculus. Newton understood the inverse relationship between differentiation and integration, a concept that is fundamental to calculus and allows for the efficient solution of many problems. Calculus was essential for Newton's work in physics, enabling him to analyze complex motions and forces that could not be handled by traditional geometry. Its development was a monumental step forward in mathematics, providing the language for modern science and engineering. 4. Optics and the nature of light. Newton conducted extensive experiments with light and color, challenging prevailing theories. Composition of white light. He famously demonstrated that white light is not pure but is composed of a spectrum of colors, which can be separated by a prism and recombined. This was a direct contradiction of the Aristotelian view. Corpuscular theory of light. Newton proposed that light consists of tiny particles, corpuscles, traveling in straight lines. While later experiments would show light also exhibits wave-like properties, his corpuscular theory explained phenomena like reflection and refraction effectively. Reflecting telescope. Based on his understanding of chromatic aberration in lenses, Newton designed and built the first successful reflecting telescope, which used mirrors to eliminate color distortion. This design is still used in many modern telescopes. His work in optics laid the foundation for the scientific study of light and color, leading to advancements in telescope design and understanding of the electromagnetic spectrum. 5. Other contributions. Sound. He investigated the speed of sound and its propagation. Fluid mechanics. He made contributions to the study of fluid dynamics, particularly in Book 2 of Principia. Thermodynamics. Though not fully developed into a separate field during his time, his work on heat and cooling, Newton's law of cooling, was an early step. Binomial theorem. He generalized the binomial theorem to non-integer exponents, a significant mathematical achievement. Newton's scientific contributions were interconnected, each building upon the others to form a coherent and revolutionary understanding of the physical world. His work provided the intellectual tools and the conceptual framework that would dominate scientific thought for centuries. Sir Isaac Newton's legacy is immense and multifaceted, extending far beyond the confines of science into philosophy, religion, and the very fabric of modern thought. Newton's Principia Mathematica stands as the crowning achievement of the scientific revolution. It transformed natural philosophy from a collection of disparate observations into a coherent, predictive science based on mathematical laws. His laws of motion and universal gravitation provided a unified explanation for phenomena from the smallest terrestrial movements to the grandest celestial mechanics. This established the paradigm of classical physics, which remained unchallenged for over 2 centuries until the advent of relativity and quantum mechanics. His work provided the blueprint for how science should be conducted, through rigorous observation, mathematical modeling, and experimental verification. The success of Newtonian mechanics inspired generations of scientists to apply similar methods to other fields, leading to the development of chemistry, geology, and biology as quantitative sciences. Newton's mechanistic view of the universe profoundly influenced Enlightenment thinkers. The idea of a universe governed by immutable, discoverable laws resonated with philosophers who sought to apply reason and natural law to human society, government, and ethics. Figures like John Locke, Voltaire, and Montesquieu drew inspiration from Newton's systematic approach, believing that if the universe operated according to rational principles, so too could human affairs. The concept of a clockwork universe, set in motion by a divine clockmaker, and then running according to its own predictable laws, became a dominant metaphor. This worldview fostered optimism about human reason and progress, suggesting that through scientific inquiry, humanity could unlock the secrets of the universe and improve its condition. Newton's independent development of calculus revolutionized mathematics. It provided the essential tools for analyzing change, motion, and complex curves, becoming indispensable for physics, engineering, economics, and countless other fields. While the priority dispute with Leibniz was unfortunate, the combined contributions of both men laid the foundation for modern mathematical analysis. The principles laid out by Newton became the basis for much of modern engineering. His laws of motion and gravity are still used today in designing everything from bridges and buildings to spacecraft and ballistic missiles. His reflecting telescope design was a significant technological advancement that paved the way for larger and more powerful astronomical instruments. Beyond his specific discoveries, Newton became an enduring symbol of human intellectual capacity and the power of scientific inquiry. He is often seen as the quintessential genius, a figure who, through sheer force of intellect, unlocked the deepest secrets of nature. His name is synonymous with profound scientific insight. Despite its immense success, Newtonian physics had its limitations. It did not fully explain the nature of gravity itself, only its effects, nor did it account for phenomena at extreme speeds or very small scales. These limitations would eventually lead to the development of Einstein's theories of relativity and quantum mechanics in the 20th century. However, even these revolutionary theories did not invalidate Newton's work. Rather, they showed that his laws were a highly accurate approximation within a specific domain, everyday speeds and scales. Newton's legacy is also complex due to his personal eccentricities, his alchemical pursuits, and his theological studies. For centuries, these non-scientific aspects of his life were often downplayed or ignored, as they did not fit the image of the purely rational scientist. However, modern scholarship recognizes that these pursuits were integral to Newton's holistic worldview and his relentless quest for truth, whether in the laws of motion or the secrets of ancient prophecy. In conclusion, Sir Isaac Newton was a titan of intellect whose work fundamentally transformed science and Western thought. He provided a unified, mathematical description of the physical universe, laying the foundation for classical physics and inspiring the Enlightenment. His legacy continues to shape our understanding of the world and the scientific method itself. He truly stood on the shoulders of giants, and in doing so, allowed all who came after him to see further.